Oh, yes. It's a big road win for the Brooklyn Nets, 119-118 over the Washington Wizards. An important victory to stem the tide in the absence of Kevin Durant. We're going to kick it off with the incredible play of the first half, Kyrie Irving. And then a little bit of LaMarcus Aldridge, vintage style in the second half, run through a lot of the sequences that mattered most late, but primarily about how the Nets are finding ways to create new rotations and new ways to manufacture wins, Doug.
Yeah, this is a big win. We talked about it yesterday about why these wins are going to be really important. We're going to reconfirm that during this episode about why
Doug was right.
Yeah, of course.
Need not be said. Need not be mentioned. I apologize.
All right, now look, we're going to get into this. We're going to talk tons of Kyrie, tons of LMA. We'll talk about Harden's game, some of the stuff that went right, some of the stuff that went wrong. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Hey, you've got the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He is Doug Norrie, Blue Certified, check mark, fresh on Twitter, and owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy projections. DraftKings, FanDuel, he's got you covered. I am at Adam Armbrecht, not Blue, fresh, check mark certified, and yet still covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast in a crucial offseason. We come into you, friends, reminding you, thank you for making us your first listen today, free on all those great platforms. A barn burner, 119-118 victory, a big one for the Brooklyn Nets on the road against the Wizards. We're going to get into the big performance early from Kyrie, the heavy lifting from one LaMarcus Aldridge late, and then we'll kick it off at the top, Doug, with some, let's call it questionable refereeing along the way.
Yeah, let's just get out of the way. The refs stunk in this game. They were terrible. They were terrible
bad.
both ways. They were terrible both ways. It bogged down the game. They made some terrible calls. I that's all the time we're going to spend on it because you got to talk about Kyrie Irving, man. Like this is exactly. We'll get through like the later game stuff that happened, but it's just another reminder of sort of exactly what needs to happen for the Nets with Durant out, right? Like this is, and it's still just going to be such a shame that it's only these road games, and I'm sure we'll just end up mentioning that. But we just saw in the first half specifically, when Kyrie is just in his bag, there is just so little that you can do to stop him, right? And they tried all different kind of defensive schemes against him. Like Kuzma got cooked, KCP got cooked. Like it just didn't matter early on because he just had it all working. And frankly, this is exactly the path of like what they need to happen. And it's not rocket science. Like you don't need to watch basketball forever to figure this out. But
Kyrie
he just was
used more.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like, yeah, like because especially too, like Harden had a really rough game this game, and they still were able to win. And like, there's just so many scenarios without Kyrie that just doesn't happen. And so this is why it's so crucial for him to play like this. And like, it's crazy that he's already at this level with so few games back. So he's the key to the victory. We'll talk about the other stuff, but man, it's just like what a blessing to have him on the team, even in the times where he's going to be able to play.
Yeah, we talked about it over the last handful of episodes in his return, the difference that he has, the impact that he has from the pace of play, right? We said it a lot of times before. We'll say it again. Harden will work the fast break. Kyrie Irving wants to work the fast break. He gets out in transition. He can be a man of one sometimes on those possessions. And then his effectiveness in and around. He only shot 2 of 8 actually from the perimeter, which is a little surprising to look back at it after the game. But 13 of 23 from the field, had 22 first half points. And that's really, I think, the biggest piece of what he brings especially in the absence of Kevin Durant is when you need to get off to an early and fast pace. We've seen it. Frankly, even from Kevin Durant, I think sometimes we gloss over that a little slow start, and then by the end of the game, 30 points. But James Harden as well. He can have these ebbs and flows. I think that Kyrie is the best tip-ready player to go out and get you buckets and kind of take authority on the offensive end in a hurry. And he did that again in this one. And I assume that this is kind of going to be the theme and trend here. Let Kyrie cook as early and as often as possible, and then build everything else off of that.
Yeah, see, and he's okay. Well, take this with how I mean this. It's like he is like Durant in that he, unlike Harden, can facilitate offense like only through him. Now, sometimes that can be a little bit of a curse because there's times where you can get a little too dependent on that and it starts to get bogged down. We've seen that at times with Durant too. You'll still take it, obviously, every day of the week, but he's able to create offense just solely on his own in a way that really no one else on the team, or frankly, very few players in the NBA in general can do, right? Because he can score at all three levels. He can just destroy just about any matchup, just either with speed or craftiness, or he can get to the rim and finish over guys. And that's what we saw early on, where it's just like it doesn't matter what you throw at him, he's going to be able to score. And Durant has that same ability. It looks different, obviously, but it's that same sort of ISO scoring that is really, really, really important in the NBA. It's like, frankly, probably the best skill you can have. Harden is not like this kind of guy. A lot of like other kind of things need to go right for him. He's still great, and you'll take it. You'll also take it, and it's a nice difference. And you want all sort of it to be fluid and you want it to be different. Like you don't want all these individual guys, but Kyrie is just able to do it so well that when it's really working, we saw what happens in the first half. You see what happens and kind of gets bogged down in the second half when they really, really struggle to score. But it's just so important to have for a team that just lost Durant to be able to say, hey, when we need it, we can just give you the ball and just like let you do something. Right. And get a good defensive matchup and away you go.
And I think that's the other thing is in this balance of a really bad night for James Harden, you still get this victory behind Kyrie Irving's early effort. And to your point, the other similar thing, listen, it's a win and it's great, but in a game when the Nets went short rotation, only 3 players off the bench, we're going to get to LaMarcus Aldridge, but you only went with Cam Thomas and Brown. That's the entire rotation you ran with 38 minutes for Irving, Patty Mills in that starting lineup, 38 minutes, right? And then you even get 35 from Edwards along with 39 from Harden. So you're running a lot of max minutes here, and you did get this same sample size of when it had been Kevin Durant and James Harden. The early flow seems to work, and then there's this pushback from the opposition. An adjustment gets made, and the Nets are still trying to figure out how do we counteract that and make sure that we open up the offense again, because only 8 second half points for Kyrie. I think a lot of that was you start to see his legs maybe going a little bit as he's just getting back there, a couple of front rim shots that barely got there. But this is now, it's funny because you replace Kevin Durant with Kyrie Irving, and it feels like we're cycling back through this same structure of figuring out how to work it around them. It's to your point, it's a good problem to have, and you get away with it in this one, I think. But it'll be interesting to see how they evolve and how Nash evolves rotations to try to fill out some minutes behind him.
And the way that this team is constructed right now, like this can happen. Like they shot a decent amount. They shot 25 threes in this game, which is a good sign. Like for a team that, sometimes has not been shooting all that many threes with Durant on the court. That was just not something they were doing. So you will go through streaking. I mean, look, they still put up 119 points. We kind of we talk about the second half as being a disappointment, but it was only, it was a disappointment, but the first half, you can't just say that without saying the first half was like unbelievable, like record setting,
right.
record setting awesome. Like
right.
their offensive rating in the first half was just like, I think I saw someone tweet out, it was like 140 or something like that. So like when you have this more kind of it was kind of 4-out offense that they were running frankly for most of the game, then you can just go through some streakiness if the ball just doesn't go down. But you get the first half where you just piled it on so much in the first half that it ended up being fine in the aggregate. So this is just what you sometimes I think you're going to get from this offense. It's like there's going to be stretches where it looks absolutely unstoppable, and there's going to be stretches where the ball doesn't go down. And that's just what you kind of have to live with, I think, here as a Nets fan, knowing that, more times than not, they're going to end up winning.
Yep, we're going to lean into LaMarcus Aldridge next, who then picked up the slack in the second half of this one. Talk about some overall late game sequences a little bit, the 2 rookies that are still in there. And then I think even that starting rotation and what seems to be the philosophy, at least in the short term, with Kevin Durant out. But first, got to tell you about Bet Online. That's because they want to wish you a happy new betting year in the 2022 season to come. I'm going to stay away from my previous iteration of that. BetOnline wants to wish you a happy new betting year, and that's continued with the playoffs and beyond, of course, because it remains your number 1 spot for all the best sports wagering for 2022. New year, that means new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up for today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use that promo code Locked On, like the podcast network, to get started. 50% welcome bonus, promo code Locked On. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. So then, as I say, all the heavy lifting in the first half came from Kyrie. You needed somebody else to pick it up. And it turns out that there was a vintage LaMarcus Aldridge performance just waiting to break out. This guy, it almost seems criminal that you can be a guy that essentially has a very specific shot that he wants to get to with regularity. And somehow, and he's not Kevin Durant. He's not, I create my space, I go where I want to go. He effectively just moves to the elbow-ish and knocks it down. And he was phenomenal and very much needed, again, with a quiet night from Harden. Aldridge picked it up there, 11 to 15 from the field, 27 points coming off the bench.
Yeah, look, they lost all the Harden minutes, -8, like for the game, but it was because they were able to make up the difference here because Aldridge was just so good. And it just, and credit to Nash here. I know they ran such shorter rotations, but they basically made it so that just about every guy that they paired with the Aldridge lineups, there's a little Bruce Brown in there, but had enough shooters on the court that gave him space to operate like on the elbows, right? Because that is really what he needs at this point in his game. Like he's going to be able to get that shot over most defenders, right? Like he's going to, if you try to sag him at all, like he will just pop and just is pretty automatic from those spots. And so, but that doesn't look as good when there's not enough spacing, because when there's not enough spacing, you can just flash another guy at him. There's not as much room to operate, and he maybe the looks aren't as clean. But in this game, because even a guy like Kessler Edwards can space the court, it doesn't like do much, but he can at least be there, right? Like he can at least be there standing in the corner, having to pull a defender that way. And they go ultra small with Mills, and he gets, this is all to say, all this stuff comes together to really help Aldridge in this stuff, because when they can space the floor around him, then they can just pick and pop him. They can get him into advantageous even post-ups, which I usually hate, but I'll take it from him. And so this is the other thing where like if the lineups are going to be created in such a way without Durant that they're going to be able to unlock spacing for Aldridge, then I think actually we could see, I mean, not this kind of shooting, 11 for 15, 27 points. That's definitely the peak of what you're going to get from him. But it's not unrealistic to see, like, to be able to see probably pretty consistent performances from him from a scoring perspective if there's enough spacing. And I think that's going to be the thing that we probably didn't factor. Well, I did not factor in last time when we were talking about how these lineups were going to look. Partly because we just haven't seen a ton of Aldridge lately, but like they're definitely going to lean on his scoring here, because him being that secondary scorer looks a lot better with these types of lineups.
Yeah, and you talk about, obviously, Day'Ron Sharpe still got the start in this one, 16 minutes, the 5 fouls. It's funny because he gives you a sample of everything that he can be capable of, and he does it in such a small amount of time because he got to get out of there because he's going to pick up those fouls. But I think you're right, because Aldridge is still, again, even when Claxton comes, he's out right now. When he gets back in there, can he score? Yes, dependent on the work of Kyrie or the work of James Harden. LaMarcus Aldridge is the only guy that they can play at the 5 or just have out on the floor that you can go to for some consistent points. And you mentioned the lineup. It's worth just mentioning they've leaned into, clearly. You wondered what are they going to do to replace Kevin Durant? Well, you go with Kessler Edwards. He was already in the starting lineup. You're using Day'Ron Sharpe. But you get Patty Mills, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden out there. And I'll be curious to see how they move forward with it. But the bottom line is they went with more offensive firepower and a better way to produce spacing on the offensive end. Like it seems like at least the first experiment was going to be, let's lean into being as effective as we can on offense, and then see what we need to do to manage a game in the second half and get some wins. And I think it's the right choice, because that's the first thing you have to go to is more scoring and more firepower. And so far it looks like it's paying off. Even in the loss against the Cleveland Cavaliers, I think we'd still say the sample we got there was good. And now this is maybe that affirmation of, yes, we can live with this for right now.
Yeah, and look, the thing that you're going to do the best is score. Like that's just what this team is. Even with with Durant on the court too.
Yeah.
That was always the thing. It was like, hey, we can actually be league average ish, or even maybe a little worse on defense, because the scoring is going to be so overwhelming from these guys that it just won't matter. Like in the end, it's just not going to matter. Like we can be sort of deficient even on one end, and they really haven't been totally, like especially last year, but they can be at times, right? And because the scoring will just absolutely overwhelm you. Aldridge is a piece of that. He's not particularly a great defender, but he can in the right matchups, especially like this against like sort of undynamic defensive bigs. Like Harrell struggle with him. Like, Gafford is going to struggle to come out because they can back cut him, and like there's going to be trouble there. And so, and Thomas Bryant, like just with whatever. But Aldridge is part of that. Like Aldridge is part of that because when his game is cooking, it makes up for the fact that he just isn't that great of a defender. And that just is part of this overall theme. Like that's like that you saw with the starting lineup. The theme here is, hey, yeah, this is undersized. This could be really a big problem on defense. And at times it was, but in the end, it kind of might just not matter that much because the scoring is so dynamic and so brutal on the defense that, yeah, like you just give away a lot on the defensive end. It got close. Maybe we're talking different if they don't win the game. Like I'm sure we'd feel a little bit differently about this. But in the end, like that is just what they're going to have to play into. They're just going to have to score like 115 to 120 points a night with this group. They couldn't get it done against Cleveland, but that's just going to need to be the path.
And I think that's also why you start with Day'Ron Sharpe in that lineup. Because to your point,
oh yeah,
let's try to score. And Kessler Edwards as well, right? These are two guys that you're excited about. Day'Ron Sharpe trying to body out some guys, get some rebounds on the defensive end. Kessler Edwards versatility, get him on some good matchups. I thought he did a lot of good. We're not going to get too much into him. I thought he did a lot of good defensive work. The stat line wasn't big, but he was doing things that mattered. If you can build that lead, now the third quarter and fourth quarter is the luxury of that spacing you've created. Now you let LaMarcus Aldridge have some success and hopefully sustain and extend it. So it's going to be interesting, man.
Let me say one more thing about that. And also like what we kind of left off was in the end of this game, when the Wizards are kind of like storming back and it's starting to look like a little dire, right?
Yeah.
And then Harrell just like completely throws down like a massive dunk. But right after that, the Nets just went out and scored like a bunch of points and it was all Aldridge. It was Aldridge scoring in those moments late. I think he scored 6 or 7 straight points, which is not usually what you would think would happen in late game scenarios when you have James Harden and Kyrie Irving. Because usually late game scenarios and close games, it becomes all about the stars. Like offenses will just default to the stars because that's what you should do. Like these are your most confident scorers, and you just need to sort of live and die with those scenarios. To have him be the the catalyst for all the scoring late is just another great sign when it wasn't happening from the other two.
And let's remember too, one more tip of the cap. Kessler Edwards knocked down one big triple. He had 2 points until late, hit one big corner three to complement what Aldridge did. And you bring up a good point. The thing that we struggled with when watching the Nets is, for as good as they are offensively in late games, it's get the ball to Harden, get the ball to KD, and see what happens. And it happened in this game for stretches too, where they got bogged down late in shot clocks, had a couple of violations, but it was nice to see that you took what was being given to you, right? You found the plus matchup and leaned into it. I think there have been times over the course of this season where you go, something has to be available here. When they're running blitzes at Kevin Durant on the perimeter, something has to be open, and it just feels like they couldn't identify it. This was also a good step forward in that direction, and it doesn't hurt that you have Kyrie Irving, who, again, is that elite passer and is going to make the right play more often than not, and that was going back to the well of LaMarcus Aldridge. Now let's also, in a second here, get into the importance of this win. Touch back on Doug's thesis from the last episode, try to drill down on what he was trying to speak to. But before we do, just a reminder, you make us your first listen. You can make Locked On Now your second listen of the day. It's also free on all those great platforms. And it's, of course, local expert coverage all across the NBA, like only the Locked On Network can give you. You got to go check it out. It's everybody hustling, just like the Dougster and I, to give you all those great insights. On the side of the importance of this game, you said it last episode. We wondered if some people were going to get into the YouTube comments and maybe not fully grasp what the takeaway was meant to be. You actually found, I want you to hit the numbers before we even talk about how important it was to win this game, because on the back end, you found the win percentages basically for the contending teams, and there was a stark difference between where the Nets are and basically everyone else.
Yeah, I wish I had found this. I wish I just had found this beforehand, because this would have just crystallized all my comments. And I went looking for it like a little harder after the podcast. But on 538, if you look at chance to make the playoffs through their Raptor rating system, which is a pretty good system, and definitely plays out end of season simulation stuff. That's just gonna like look at who you have to play and who you have and all this, who's available minutes wise, and it's overall pretty good. But if you look at if you look at the chance of making the playoffs, if you go through the contending teams, it's the Bucks 98%, Suns 99%, or more than 99%. Like they don't go the decimals. Jazz, there's a chance to make the playoffs. Jazz more than 99%, Heat 97%, Warriors more than 99%, and Grizzlies more than 99%. Right, so those are considered to be some of the best teams in basketball. The difference here is the Nets, who are among that group, were only at 92%. And that is actually kind of what I was trying to say, is that that's actually almost the exact number that I had in my head, which is like this 8 to 10% chance, right? Like it should be 99%, like those other teams. Like it should be more than 99%. And if Kevin Durant was here, it definitely would be. Yep. But it's like that 7 to 8% difference, which is it's not likely, but it's not nothing. Like if you understand anything about probabilities, it just means that like if we did this thing 100 times, there's 8 times the Nets might not make the playoffs. Whereas those other teams, if you do it 100 times, it's like, dude, 100 times are going to make it in this scenario.
By the way, that's when you sent me that after the last episode. That's what I did in my head. I was like, 92. Well, that means out of 100 opportunities that this team would miss the playoffs 8 times. I was like, that sounds weird to me, and not weird as in wrong, as in, oh, that's a big number if you put it in that type of context. So that's where we started in the last episode, and now this was important. This is a team in the Wizards that is there in the standings. They're behind the Nets right now, but we think it could be a difficult road here, and there's a reason why I still think we need to be careful as we go forward. But getting this win matters. What you did right there was push them. Yeah. You just push the game. You put a game between them. That's one more game that they need to rise up the ranks. And because it's head-to-head, it's 2 wins the Wizards need to accomplish versus the losses for the Brooklyn Nets, right? So this was not insignificant, and I was pretty impressed with, I think, as we've said all season.
Can I say something? Let me just jump in real quick. One more thing. Sure. I want to. Sorry to cut you off, but it's about this other thing. So I just went back to the 538, and this is what I was actually saying about like why these kind of games actually matter. Like
what's the adjustment now?
It was up 2%, so now it's up to 94%. Like this actually, and everyone's gonna say, "Oh, 92 to 94." Like who cares? It matters. Like this stuff matters. And that's why I was saying, hey, this game actually matters a little more than you think it's going to, because I guarantee if they lose this game, like if one of those shots goes down at the end, that number's now down to like 90%, right? And like and you're gonna start chipping away at it. So that's all. Sorry to cut you off, but it was just it was just had to do with how the numbers had changed, just even in just this one win.
And by the way, anyone that would scoff at 92, okay, fine. But if it was 90, like you said, 10% chance, ooh, that sounds even more aggressive, right? So these are the reasons why. And to your point of why these games matter, I mentioned the minutes there before, right? Running 38 minutes, running Patty Mills 38 minutes in this game. We've said all season long how when teams play the Brooklyn Nets, it's the target on their backs. Everybody wants to come after them. We know that this game was important for the Wizards, right? This was an opportunity for them to take down Brooklyn, pick up ground in the standings, and feel like a team that's been moving in the right direction is now asserting itself as a team that needs to be watched in the East. That's why you saw a short rotation. That's why they went with maximum minutes for all these key players to try to do everything you could to secure this win. And I'll be interested to see, what does the next game look like? No, didn't use any Blake Griffin in this one. Didn't use any James Johnson in this one. The Nets may start to pick and choose their battles when they look at the schedule. What are the most crucial wins for us, specifically against Eastern Conference teams, that matter for where we can keep ourselves in the standings until Kevin Durant comes back? So I think you saw that in the rotation, the minutes that you saw here, and the fact that the Nets seem to be very dialed in for this game, especially as we said at the top, Kyrie Irving early, asserting his dominance. And it felt like, outside of the wackiness with the referees, that it was kind of this thing of, let's take the air out of the Wizards real quick here. And they battled their way back, and it got close, but that was, second half, after a lot of things went on there. They were up 15, 16 points along the way here. That's a big hole to dig out of, as we've seen the Nets try to do in reverse.
And look, the team is not a great defensive team like this, so you're going to see runs like this, right? I think we're going to see over the stretch with Kyrie, we're going to see sick offensive runs that look like they can never. Looks like they'll never lose, a la the first half, and then it looked not so great for long stretches, a la the second half. I think that's just going to probably end up being the theme, just because of the nature of how this team is currently constructed. Good on Nash for finding something early that worked and just basically sticking with it. Like when the shots go in, it's easy. I think that that's a case where it's like, okay, what am I going to do? Make huge changes? LaMarcus Aldridge is just making everything. I'm going to take him out and get weird with this. Like I think sometimes it's easy. Yeah, sometimes it's easy, but I you said they which I actually didn't even realize till you mentioned it. I watched the game obviously, but I didn't realize they had played so few guys off the bench, and it's just that is the right move in this situation. Like they have to absolutely make hay these Eastern Conference games with Kyrie. They just have to win them. They have to win them. And this is like not a must-win game. Like it kind of felt like it, and so I think credit to Nash in this one. Find the thing that works. The pieces mostly kind of click together. You get this game from Aldridge. If you told me that Harden was going to go 0 for 5 from 3 and turn the ball over 8 times, sure, I would have really been wondering what exactly, you would have just thought they lost, honestly. Right. Like if you knew that was the game that he had, you would have thought, okay, that's a loss. That it wasn't was just a testament to sort of like keeping things tight, keeping the rotations that worked. Like I said, Aldridge knocking the shots down, and Nash just saying, okay, I'm going to stick with this because this is the thing that's kind of working for us.
Other thing, so and just to round out this thought around the Wizards game, and they're going to have another one coming up in a handful here. But when you go over the standings immediately, and this really is the way I'm going to look at it, the Nets win. They're a half a game out of first. Now Miami Heat are up in first ahead of the Bulls there. Percentage points, the Nets are behind the Bulls in the 3 spot. With the win, Washington is now 5.5 games behind Brooklyn. Every time that you beat any of those teams, the Raptors, the Hornets, the Celtics, every time that you win one of those games for the next, we said, right, 8 weeks, let's give it until Durant comes back. Every time you win one of those games against those teams, you go, whew, bought ourselves another couple games right there. So that's why this one really mattered. And we joked. Let's just touch on this quickly here. There's 2 things I want to cover. It's a bad game for Harden. It just seems like that's just been the nature of his season, very up and down. We tried to blame it on the knock to the head. Unfortunately, that happened towards the end of the game, not the beginning. So it's a little bit out of order, but I think we can still apply it. But Bruce Brown, it's been weird to see how he seems to have lost his role in the team. I mean, obviously he's lost his role, but more specifically, he looks like a guy that is pressing to be important to this team and really struggling with it. And maybe this is incidental. It's going to go by the wayside ultimately, but I always kept thinking that he would round himself into something here. And we've seen it over on Twitter. We've seen it in comments. Like Nets fans are out on Bruce Brown now. And I don't know if that's just a simple product of, hey, we have other guys that can fill in these roles, or we think we have bigger needs and he's not going to be able to satisfy those. But it's interesting to see where he's ended up here. And this was a kind of an example of that too, because you just don't see the effectiveness that he had last year on the defense or offensive end.
I think, I honestly think that these minutes are probably Bembry's if Bembry isn't hurt, to start.
Don't get choked up about it, buddy. We love Brown.
Sorry about that.
He'll stick around.
I think those probably would have been Bembry's minutes because the way they're constructed as a team, Washington is kind of more wing heavy. Right. I know they play these sort of 3 centers, but they're not really all none of them are centers that can really destroy you. They're good at getting on the glass and they're decently athletic and they're all a little bit different from each other, but it's not you need to go super big against Washington. So I think you can play, defensive wings, especially when you have a guy like Beal out there, and then Dinwiddie to some degree also, and then some of the guys they bring in off the bench that are going to try to sort of live more around the perimeter, like Kispert and Denny and these guys. You can get away with a guy like Bruce Brown in there for just athleticism and stuff. So I think that if Bembry had been healthy, he would have just played those minutes, is my guess. I think I'm with you on Bruce Brown. I don't know what his long-term role, if any, is with this team. He doesn't do anything probably good enough at this point to definitely not to play in the playoffs, you wouldn't think. And so, I don't know. I didn't have any particular problem with how he played tonight. I thought he was mostly fine. It's just that at this point for his game, it's just not good enough on either end to warrant tons of playing time. So I think that's kind of where I land on him.
And the funny thing is, too, probably in the positive vein, as we wrap it up, and we know we'll look ahead to see how the Nets perform here going forward, and what adjustments Nash makes a lot. That's probably the biggest thing. Is like, how do you shift here now after these minute runs, even with all these road games back to back to in sequence in succession? What will they do with Kyrie? Is he going to need to still monitor the minutes at all? It doesn't seem like it. But Brown now with the addition of Patty Mills, and then even with Cam Thomas, it's like, when are you going to sacrifice? I know he played pseudo 5 at times, but when are you going to sacrifice those guard minutes when you feel like you need to have more offense, right? I think that's as much as anything, which is a good problem to have if you think right now you need to more than ever lean into the offensive side of things. So, listen, man, it's a good win. It obviously matters a lot. I think it confirms what you were talking about, Doug. So hopefully fans can latch on to that in terms of how crucial this win was. They're going to see him again. In the meantime, you can get us out of here after we remind everybody to make sure to check out Locked On Bets. It's your boy Q, an expert analysis from Lee Sterling covering all those betting lines around the league. It's a good listen, and it's free on all those platforms.
Yeah, go check that out. Make sure you go and check out the YouTube channel. Tons of comments in there. Frankly, couldn't keep up with all the comments today. Tried to get in there and respond to as many as I could. There's just so many, and we really appreciate it. So if I don't respond to every comment, it's not because of you. It's just because there's just a lot of people in there, and we really appreciate the conversation. So subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel. Put the link in the show notes.
Everything is about adjustments, my friends, and that's what the Brooklyn Nets are doing right now. And that is because without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible. Franklin Zappa.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. Also, one more thing before we get out of here. I'm going to mention this a couple times over the next week. Adam and I are going to be at the Lakers game next week on the 25th.
Yes.
So if you are also you're listening and you're going to be at the game too, like I said, I'll mention this a couple more times in episodes over the next couple days. But if you're going to be there, hit us up because we'll try to meet up and just say hi to anybody that's there. Like, we want to be able to do that. So we're at the Lakers on the 25th. Let us know, comments, Twitter, wherever, that if you're going to be there. And whatever Adam just said, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.